crowded, sunlit cafe. Background chatter and clinking of cups. Camera pans slowly, focusing on small human details. Faces, gestures, movement. You know that moment when something just doesn't feel right? Steven Seagal was walking through a bustling cafe, calm as ever, carrying nothing but a small bag. People chatted, laughter filled the room, and yet his eyes caught something that made him pause. A woman, sitting quietly in the corner, seemed off. Not the usual tiredness or stress. Something was deeper. Her sleeve had ridden up slightly, and the faint marks on her arm were impossible to ignore. Bruises, fresh and hidden, speaking a story she wasn't telling out loud. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He simply noticed. But sometimes, noticing is the first step toward everything that comes next. You could feel the tension in the air, the kind that makes everyone around subconsciously take a step back, even without realizing why. People were focused on their phones, their conversations, their coffee cups, oblivious to what was happening in this quiet corner. And in that instant, you know the room changed. Just a little. Because someone who notices doesn't just see, they understand. What would you do if you noticed someone in trouble in a public place? Would you walk away? Would you say something? Or would you quietly wait, hoping someone else will intervene? Think about it, because this moment, small as it seems, was about to change everything in ways no one expected. The camera slowly moves around the cafe, showing subtle details. The sunlight through the window, the way people sip their drinks, and the quiet tension building in one corner. Steven Seagal had noticed the bruises, but he didn't make a scene. He simply stepped closer, keeping his presence calm but alert. His eyes followed her, careful not to startle her, yet sharp enough to see the fear she was trying to hide. At first glance, it could have been anything, an accident, a careless bump, or just a strange shadow. But something in her posture, the slight flinch whenever someone approached, told him otherwise. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else. But not to him. The cafe itself seemed to fade into the background. The chatter, the clinking of cups, the shuffle of chairs, it all became distant noise. The focus shifted entirely to this small, tense moment. You could feel it, the tension building without a single word spoken. The woman avoided eye contact, her hands gripping her cup tightly, fingers turning white at the knuckles. She wasn't speaking, but every movement was a signal, a silent cry that someone needed to notice. And that's exactly what happened. Because sometimes noticing is more than seeing. It's reading the story that isn't being told. Steven didn't rush in. He didn't demand answers. He simply made himself present, a calm shadow nearby, letting her know someone was paying attention without threatening her space. The weight of that silent attention shifted the energy in the room. It was in these moments, the small, tense, human moments, that true understanding starts. Not in loud declarations or dramatic confrontations, but in quiet, deliberate observation and the decision to act responsibly. Now here's something to think about. How do you think someone should react in a tense situation like this? Would they confront the problem directly? Step back and call for help? Or wait, careful not to escalate things? There's no right or wrong answer, but every choice matters. Even as people around continue their conversations, some unaware, some merely curious, the air around the corner was thick with possibility. The tension was real, subtle, and growing, and the actions taken in these first few moments would shape everything that came next. And that's the thing about moments like this. They feel ordinary until they aren't. They start small, unnoticed, but the decisions made in these seconds can ripple into something much bigger. The cafe, the sun, the casual background noise, all faded into the edges of awareness. What mattered now was presence, observation, and the careful, deliberate choices that Steven was about to make. He had already noticed, and sometimes noticing is the hardest. The cafe's atmosphere subtly shifts. Patrons glance up, sensing something different. The camera pans to focus on the small cluster around the woman, highlighting nervous energy and the faint unease of bystanders. Moments after Steven's quiet attention fell on her, subtle signs of unease began to ripple through the space. People started to notice, even if only subconsciously. A chair scraped against the floor. A cup rattled in its saucer. Nothing loud, just enough to signal that something was happening. The woman's eyes flicked toward him for the briefest second. There was a flicker of hesitation, a mix of relief and fear, as if weighing whether it was safe to trust him. And that hesitation, so small, yet so charged, became the heartbeat of the scene. The air felt heavier now, not because anyone had said a word, but because tension was a presence, almost tangible. Steven's calm gaze met the subtle movements of those around him, silently reading reactions, gauging who might act impulsively and who might simply step back. From another corner, a man's raised voice pierced the background chatter. It was subtle, dismissive, a challenge, or maybe just curiosity, but it was enough to escalate the energy. People turned, watching, sensing that a moment of confrontation was possible. And it wasn't the loudest voice that held the power. It was the one that had been quiet, measured, and deliberate from the start. In these moments, misjudgments can happen. Assumptions about strength, intentions, or courage begin to shape how people react. Some leaned in, trying to guess what would happen next. Others froze, uncertain. And that uncertainty, the split second of doubt, is exactly where tension thrives. Have you ever misjudged someone based on appearances? How did it turn out? It's easy to underestimate someone based on how they look, their demeanor, or even their age. And it's easy to assume danger or weakness incorrectly. This moment in the cafe captured that perfectly, a subtle misalignment between perception and reality. Steven didn't act aggressively. He didn't yell or threaten. He simply positioned himself in a way that balanced respect with presence. That balance, calm yet deliberate, made those around him reassess. Each small, quiet gesture carried weight, challenging the assumptions of everyone in the room. The tension continued to build. Patrons began to inch their chairs back, subtly creating space around the focal point. The woman shifted, subtly protective but slightly emboldened by his presence. Everyone's eyes were now drawn to him, waiting, watching, wondering what he would do next. And in that silence, that charged pause, the real conflict began. Not a physical fight yet, but a battle of perception, expectation, and courage. The stakes were invisible but clear, understanding who could act, who would, and how appearances can deceive. Every subtle gesture, the shift of a hand, the intake of breath, the quietest glance, added to the rising tension. It was a lesson unfolding before anyone could even speak. And the story was about to take the next step, where choices would force reactions and actions would speak louder than words. The scene now had all the elements: uncertainty, silent judgment, and the subtle escalation that draws an audience in, holding their attention as they wonder. Who will make the first move, and what will it cost them? The cafe is tense, subtle shifts in body language ripple through the room. Camera focuses on Steven Seagal, calm and deliberate, as he assesses the situation. Steven Seagal had been observing quietly every movement, every glance, every subtle reaction around him. The woman's discomfort was still there, visible only to those paying attention, but it was enough to trigger action. And sometimes, action doesn't start with a shout or a confrontation. It begins with presence. He stepped closer, not aggressively, but purposefully. His gaze met hers, calm and steady, letting her know she wasn't alone. It was the kind of quiet confidence that makes even the most tense situation feel like it can be handled. The man nearby, who had earlier been dismissive, now noticed the change. His body language shifted. He hesitated, unsure of how to proceed, his previous confidence faltering. Every person in the cafe sensed the change in energy. The room seemed to hold its breath. And then Steven acted, not with force, but with clarity. He positioned himself as a shield and a calm presence, showing that attention could be enough to influence behavior. The woman, sensing safety, straightened slightly, a small but meaningful shift in posture. This wasn't about violence or dominance. It was about awareness, timing, and using presence to de-escalate a situation. Every measured step he took, every subtle gesture carried weight. The tension, once thick and oppressive, began to shift, slowly, imperceptibly, but undeniably. The antagonistic figure, now aware that he was being observed with intention and skill, backed down slightly. No one needed to shout. No dramatic confrontation was necessary. It was the quiet, deliberate choice, the calm intervention, that changed the dynamic entirely. Would you have acted the same way if you were in this situation? Would you have stepped in quietly, like him, reading the room and choosing subtle influence? Or would your first instinct be louder, more immediate, more direct? Think about it. Sometimes the right action is not the obvious one, and courage could take many forms. The room's energy had changed completely. What once was tension and fear now became a moment of awareness, a quiet victory for perception and restraint. And the woman, once silent and tense, could finally breathe a little easier, knowing someone had noticed and acted wisely. It's moments like this, seemingly small, almost invisible, that can shift the entire course of a tense situation. And it's those who notice, who step in calmly, who often make the biggest difference, without anyone ever realizing the full extent of their impact. The cafe has shifted from tense chaos to a quiet stillness. Patrons exchange glances, and the woman takes a cautious breath. Camera lingers on the subtle changes in the room. The moment had passed, but the weight of it still hung in the air. The room, once tight with tension, now breathed in relief. Patrons who had frozen in fear began to relax, their bodies uncoiling slowly, their eyes tracing the space around them as if double-checking the danger was truly gone. The woman's posture had shifted completely. She straightened her shoulders, her hands no longer fidgeting, no longer gripping the table. The small changes said more than words ever could. She felt safe, at least for now. And that was the impact of someone noticing and choosing to act wisely. Reassurance without spectacle. Steven Seagal stepped back slightly, maintaining a calm stance, but letting the shift in energy speak for him. He didn't linger, didn't need recognition or thanks. His presence alone had changed the room. No one applauded, no one cheered, but the respect in the air was palpable. People instinctively understood that what had happened was significant. Even those who had been antagonistic earlier now hesitated, caught between pride and realization. Their confidence had been challenged, not by shouting or force, but by awareness, skill, and measured action. And in that quiet, subtle moment, the balance of the room had shifted completely. Outside, the city continued on, unaware of the small but profound events that had unfolded in this one cafe. Inside, a lesson lingered. That courage isn't always loud, that presence and timing can be far more powerful than aggression, and that noticing what others overlook can prevent tragedy before it starts. For the audience, it's a moment of reflection. What would you have done in this situation? Could you have stepped in the way he did, noticing without overreacting, influencing without confrontation? It's a quiet challenge that resonates long after the scene ends. And this brings us to think. In moments of tension, sometimes the real hero isn't the one taking the spotlight. They're the one creating safety, subtly, deliberately, with patience and clarity. The cafe had returned to normal, but the memory of that calm intervention would stay with every person who had witnessed it. A single deliberate act had rippled through the room, leaving a mark that no one could unsee. Patrons whispered to each other quietly, exchanging their own reflections on what had happened. Some marveled at the control, others at the courage, but everyone understood that there was more to heroism than flashy gestures. And in that stillness, in that quiet aftermath, one question lingered for all who watched or imagined it. How do you think you would have handled a moment like this? Sometimes, the story isn't about the fight itself. It's about what follows, how people respond, what they learn, and how a single act of awareness can quietly change everything. The cafe is quiet now. Soft light spills across the tables. Patrons sip their drinks, some still glancing toward the corner where everything unfolded. Camera slowly pans across faces, showing subtle reflections of thought, curiosity, and quiet appreciation. Moments like these are rarely dramatic on the surface. No explosions, no loud confrontations, no immediate applause. Yet the impact is profound. It's in the subtle shifts. The woman sitting a little taller, the antagonist reconsidering his next move, the room itself feeling a little calmer because someone chose awareness over indifference. Steven Seagal didn't need to prove anything. He didn't seek recognition. His actions weren't about heroics in the conventional sense. They were about presence, awareness, and knowing the right moment to act. That's the quiet power of true courage. Noticing, deciding, and acting with calm authority. And for those of us watching or imagining ourselves in this scene, there's a deeper lesson. The most powerful actions often happen in small, deliberate moments. We rarely get the credit we deserve when we act wisely or empathetically, but the ripples of that choice can touch more people than we ever see. It's easy to imagine ourselves frozen, unsure, or hesitant in a tense moment. We wonder, do I step in? Do I risk making things worse? Am I capable of doing the right thing? And that uncertainty is normal. But the story reminds us that even a small, deliberate choice, a glance, a calm intervention, a subtle presence, can make all the difference. The cafe, now quiet again, hold an invisible trace of that courage. Patrons exchange quiet glances, each processing what they witnessed in their own way. Some are inspired, some reflective, and some simply aware that they have a choice when they notice someone in trouble. And that brings us to a question for you, the viewer. What's your takeaway from this story about standing up for someone else? Think about it. How do you interpret courage in subtle moments? Is it always about action, or is awareness itself a form of standing up? Could a small gesture, silent, respectful, deliberate, carry the same weight as a bold confrontation? Reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever been the person overlooked in a tense situation, or the one who noticed but hesitated? These stories remind us that the ripple effect of noticing and choosing wisely extends far beyond the immediate moment. Sometimes we wait for grand gestures, thinking that heroism comes with visibility. But often, the real impact is invisible, felt only in the relief, safety, and trust left behind. Those quiet, deliberate moments, when someone decides to intervene thoughtfully without aggression, are the ones that shape lives. So as you think about this story, consider, how will you respond when the next quiet moment of tension presents itself? Will you notice? Will you act? Will you be the calm presence that quietly shifts everything for the better? The woman in the cafe, the subtle change in the antagonist, the shift in everyone's perception, it all started with awareness and careful choice. And that ultimately is the essence of standing up for someone else. Not always through confrontation, but often through attention, empathy, and calm, deliberate action. Moments like this are a reminder that courage doesn't always need a spotlight. Sometimes it's in the quiet, invisible choices we make. Choices that may never be recognized, but can change everything. As you leave this story in your mind, hold on to that lesson. Awareness, empathy, and subtle action can ripple far beyond what you can see. And sometimes, standing up isn't about making a scene. It's about noticing, deciding, and acting in a way that protects, supports, and uplifts. What's your takeaway from this story about standing up for someone else? Think deeply, comment honestly, and consider how these quiet, powerful choices could play out in your own life. Because the story doesn't end in the cafe, it continues in every decision you make when you notice someone who needs you.